The Kethri War Crimes Tribunal had processed 17 different species' military hierarchies without breaking stride. They understood chain of command the way economists understood supply curves. Naturally, inevitably, with the confidence that comes from universal principles. Rank meant authority. Authority meant responsibility. Responsibility meant accountability. Then they opened the human files. "Explain this to me again," demanded High Adjudicator Vexen, his four eyes scanning the holographic displays with growing irritation. Operation Shattered Constellation. Kethri casualties, 43,000. Human losses, negligible. Commanding officer. He paused, mandibles clicking in confusion. Dr. Elena Vasquez, listed as strategic consultant, civilian status. Military prosecutor Zethera's tentacles writhed with barely contained frustration. The same anomaly appears in 16 major engagements. This Vasquez entity directed tactical operations that decimated our fleets, yet holds no military commission whatsoever. Perhaps their record-keeping is primitive, suggested Defense Coordinator Krell Moss, though his tone carried little conviction. Surely no species will allow non-military personnel to command actual warfare. Vexen's laugh resembled static electricity having a nervous breakdown. Primitive? These are the same humans who turned our kinetic bombardment into a gravity slingshot that sent our own projectiles back at us. Their record-keeping might be the only competent thing about them. The tribunal chamber fell silent, except for the hum of processing cores analyzing terabytes of battle data. Each victory, and they were all human victories, which made this entire proceeding somewhat awkward, bore the same inexplicable signature. Military personnel carried out orders, but the orders themselves originated from someone who, according to every database they possessed, had never held a weapon in combat. Look at Battle of the Helix Nebula, Zethera continued, projecting tactical overlays that still made seasoned military strategists wince. We had numerical superiority, technological advantage, and controlled every viable approach vector. Then this consultant suggested humans hide their fleet inside the gravitational shadow of a dying star. Who does that? Someone with a death wish, muttered Krell Moss. Someone who understands physics better than our entire strategic command. Vex then corrected grimly. When that star went supernova, on schedule, mind you, they calculated it down to the microsecond. The radiation pulse disabled our sensors, while the gravitational shockwave accelerated their ships to velocities our point of fence couldn't track. The holographic reconstruction played out with a sort of mathematical precision that made it beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. Kethri vessels, caught completely off guard, had been systematically dismantled by what should have been a suicide run. The authorization codes traced back to the same civilian, Zethera added, her voice carrying the tone of someone who'd been personally insulted by reality. Not their fleet admiral, not their strategic command. A consultant who, according to their own personnel files, specializes in something called complexity theory. What in the seven hells is complexity theory? Krell Moss demanded. Near as we can determine, it's the study of how simple rules create unpredictable outcomes, Vexen replied, consulting his notes. She wrote her doctoral thesis on swarm behavior in Earth insects. The silence that followed could have been weaponized. Insects, Zethera repeated slowly. Specifically, something called fire ants. The paper's titled Emergent Coordination in Distributed Combat Networks. Lessons from Solenopsis invicta. Our xenobiology department says fire ants are approximately 3 millimeters long and possess negligible individual intelligence. She studied bugs, Krell Moss said, his voice flat with disbelief. This person who's been systematically dismantling our military study bugs. And somehow that qualified her to redesign human warfare. It gets more interesting, Vex then continued, clearly enjoying his colleagues' mounting horror. Her academic career includes papers on viral spread patterns, forest fire propagation, and economic collapse cascades. She's never taken a single course in military strategy. Then how? That's what we're here to determine. Vex then gestured to the accumulated evidence floating around them like accusatory ghosts. Every conventional analysis suggests humans are tactically inferior. Their ships are slower, their weapons are sophisticated, their coordination networks primitive by our standards. Yet they won every significant engagement of this war, and according to their own records, the architect of these victories learned warfare by watching insects cooperate. Zithera's tentacles had gone rigid with concentration. The pattern analysis suggests she doesn't think like a military strategist at all. Look at the Proxima offensive. Instead of engaging our battle line, human forces dispersed into seemingly random groups. We assumed it was panic. Then each group struck a different resource node simultaneously, creating a supply chain collapse that forced our retreat without a single direct confrontation. And behavior. Krell Moss realized with growing unease. Distributed foraging patterns. Precisely. While our admirals were planning grand fleet engagements, she was apparently treating the entire theater like an ecosystem. Vex then's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The humans call it systems thinking. Instead of defeating our military, she's been dismantling the logistical networks that make our military possible. Which brings us to our current predicament. Zithera observed. We're convened to prosecute war crimes, but the individual responsible for our defeats technically isn't a combatant. She holds no rank, commands no ships, and has never fired a shot in anger. How do we charge a civilian with military atrocities? More importantly, Vex then added with characteristic directness, how do we negotiate a ceasefire with someone who thinks like a planetary ecosystem instead of a military commander? The question hung in the air like a tactical problem with no clean solution. We could try asking her. Krell Moss suggested with the desperate optimism of someone watching his worldview collapse in real time. Ask her what? How she does it. Why she does it. What she wants. He gestured helplessly at the holographic battle displays. Every military protocol we have assumes we're dealing with another military. What if we're not? What if we're dealing with something else entirely? Vex then considered this with the expression of someone tasting something unexpected. You're suggesting we treat this as a first contact scenario rather than a war crimes tribunal. I'm suggesting we're completely out of our depth, Krell Moss replied. We've been trying to understand human warfare through the lens of military doctrine, but what if that's the wrong lens entirely? Zithera's tentacles performed what might charitably be called a shrug. At this point, conventional approaches have achieved nothing except adding to our casualty reports. Perhaps it's time to try unconventional approaches. Very well, Vex then decided, his tone carrying the weight of command and the resignation of someone who'd run out of better options. Issue a formal request. We want to interview this Dr. Elena Vasquez, strategic consultant, civilian status, architect of human military doctrine, and apparent student of insect behavior. What should we tell her we want to discuss? Vex then looked around at the accumulated evidence of human victories, each one more impossible than the last, each one bearing the signature of someone who shouldn't exist according to everything they understood about warfare. The truth, he said finally. We want to understand how someone who never served a day in uniform became the most effective military strategist in known space. Dr. Elena Vasquez entered the tribunal chamber with the unhurried gait of someone who'd spent 40 minutes in traffic and wasn't particularly impressed by the change of scenery. She wore civilian clothes, a detail that somehow made the assembled military tribunal feel overdressed in their ceremonial armor and rank insignia. Coffee? She asked, settling into the defendant's chair with the casual comfort of someone claiming a library reading nook. I know it's unconventional, but I've found most productive conversations happen over stimulants. High adjudicator Vex, then's 4 eyes blinked in sequential confusion. Dr. Vasquez, you understand you're here to account for actions that resulted in significant Kethri casualties? Oh, absolutely. Elena pulled a thermos from her bag and unscrewed the cap with practiced efficiency. Though I should mention up front that I'm technically retired, have been for 3 years now. Current operations are running on autopilot, more or less. Military prosecutor Zithera's tentacles performed what could only be described as a double take, autopilot. Well, established protocols, training programs, institutional memory. Elena took a sip of coffee and made a face. Airport coffee. Never again. She looked up at the tribunal with genuine curiosity. How exactly does one prosecute someone for decisions they're no longer making? The precedents you established, Vex then began carefully, continue to influence. Influence suggests I'm still pulling strings. Elena interrupted with a mild correction of a professor addressing a student's misconception. What you're dealing with now is emergence. I taught humans to think differently about conflict resolution, but what they do with that thinking, well, that's rather the point of emergent systems. Defense Coordinator Krell Moss leaned forward with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You speak of humans as if they're a collective entity rather than individual decision-makers. Aren't they? Elena's eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. I mean, aren't you? Does every Kethri warrior reinvent military doctrine from first principles? Or do they learn established patterns and adapt them to novel situations? We follow proven strategic frameworks developed by... Exactly. Collective knowledge shaped by individual contributions. Elena gestured vaguely at the holographic displays, still showing battle reconstructions. The difference is I happen to contribute a rather comprehensive framework. Zathera's voice carried the careful tone of someone navigating a minefield. This framework, it treats warfare as an ecological system rather than a military engagement. Everything is an ecological system if you zoom out far enough. Elena's response had the casual certainty of someone stating that water is wet. Armies require resources, communication networks, supply lines, morale maintenance systems, disrupt the ecosystem, and the predator-prey relationships shift accordingly. Predator-prey relationships? Krell Moss repeated, standard ecological terminology, though in this context, the definitions tend to be fluid. Elena's smile held the sort of professional satisfaction that made the tribunal collectively uncomfortable. Your fleets were apex predators in a stable environment. Humans introduced an invasive species. Invasive species, Vex then said slowly, as if tasting unfamiliar words. Organisms that exploit ecological niches in ways native species haven't evolved to counter. They don't need to be stronger or faster, just different enough to break existing patterns. Elena took another sip of coffee and grimaced again. Seriously, who designed this beverage? It tastes like punishment. You're describing warfare as if it were a biological process, Zathera observed. All competitive systems follow similar mathematical principles. Whether we're talking about bacterial colonies, economic markets, or fleet engagements, the underlying dynamics remain remarkably consistent. Elena's tone carried the enthusiasm of someone discussing a particularly interesting research problem. The key insight is recognizing which variables actually matter. And those variables are information flow, resource allocation, adaptive capacity, and network resilience. Traditional military thinking focuses on firepower and defensive positioning, which are certainly relevant, but their downstream effects are more fundamental processes. Krell Moss's expression suggested someone watching their worldview undergo structural renovation. You're saying our strategic doctrine addresses symptoms rather than causes. I'm saying your strategic doctrine assumes you're fighting other versions of yourselves. Elena's correction held no judgment, merely the patient clarity of someone explaining obvious facts. Kethri military theory optimizes for engagements between entities that think like Kethri, but humans don't think like Kethri. How do humans think? Vex then asked, and the question carried more weight than a simple inquiry. Elena considered this with a thoughtful pause of someone organizing complex ideas for a lay audience. Chaotically, humans excel at pattern recognition across seemingly unrelated domains. We see connections that shouldn't exist and exploit relationships that more logical species would dismiss as irrelevant. Give us an example. The Titan Station siege. Your defensive perimeter was mathematically perfect. Overlapping field of fire, redundant communication networks, sufficient supply stockpiles for a 6-month standoff. Elena's description was delivered with the appreciation of someone admiring elegant engineering, absolutely impeccable military architecture. Yet it fell in 18 hours, Zathera said grimly, because I suggested humans approach it like a jazz improvisation rather than a military assault. Elena's smile turned positively wicked. Instead of trying to break your defenses, we improvise around them. Turn the siege into a performance art piece where your own defensive systems became instruments in a composition you couldn't hear. The silence that followed had the quality of mind stretching to accommodate concepts that didn't quite fit. Jazz improvisation. Krell Moss repeated with the flat tone of someone whose reality had just been pickpocketed. Collaborative, spontaneous creation within flexible structural frameworks. Musicians respond to each other's contributions in real time, building something larger than any individual could conceive. Elena's explanation carried the patient enthusiasm of someone truly excited by their subject. Your defensive protocols anticipated conventional military responses, but humans treated the entire engagement as a creative collaboration. Every time you adapted to one improvisation, we'd already moved on to the next movement. And this approach, it could be taught. Vexthen's question carried undertones of both hope and dread. Oh, I certainly hope so. I've spent the last 15 years developing curricula. Elena finished her coffee and made a theatrical shudder. Though I should warn you, the learning curve involves fundamentally reconsidering how intelligence manifests in complex systems. Most military minds find it unsettling. Unsettling how? Elena's grin suggested someone about to deliver a punchline to a joke only she understood. Well, for starters, you'll need to stop thinking of warfare as something that happens between armies and start thinking of it as something that happens between ways of thinking. And once you make that conceptual shift, she paused, letting the implications settle like sediment in still water. Once you make that shift, you realize you've been trying to win a chess game while your opponents were playing jazz. Elena stood up and walked to the holographic displays with the purposeful stride of someone who just decided to take charge of a situation that was clearly being mismanaged. "May I?" she asked, though her hands were already manipulating projection controls with practiced familiarity. This will be much easier to explain with proper visual aids. The tribunal exchanged glances that would have been meaningful if any of them had any idea what was happening. Dr. Vasquez, High Adjudicator Vex, then began with the careful tone of someone trying to maintain procedural dignity. "You're here to answer questions, not conduct presentations." "Oh, I'm absolutely answering your questions," Elena replied cheerfully, pulling up a three-dimensional star map that made the tribunal's previous displays look like children's sketches. The question is whether you're asking the right ones. For instance, you keep wanting to know how I defeated your fleets, when what you should be asking is why I never tried to. The star map shifted, highlighting resource flows between systems in pulsing streams of light that resembled nothing so much as a circulatory system. "Behold, the Ketheri military-industrial complex," Elena announced with the satisfaction of a magician, revealing their favorite trick. 17 primary manufacturing worlds, 43 resource extraction points, and a logistics network that would make economists weep with joy. Absolutely magnificent in its efficiency. Military prosecutor Zithera's tentacles twitched with growing unease. "You studied our infrastructure?" "I studied everything. Supply chain vulnerabilities, communication lag times, personnel rotation schedules, even cultural preferences for different types of recreational activities." Elena's fingers danced across the controls, overlaying new data streams onto the display. The beauty of systems thinking is that everything connects to everything else. Pull the right thread and entire tapestries unravel. The display now showed what looked like a living organism, with the Ketheri war machine revealed as a complex network of interdependencies pulsing with data flows. "Your military doctrine assumes conflicts are won through superior application of force at decisive points," Elena continued, her voice taking on a rhythm of someone who'd given this lecture before. "But force is just energy directed through organizational structures. Change the structures and the force redirects itself." "You're describing sabotage," Defense Coordinator Krell Moss accused. "I'm describing gardening." Elena's correction was delivered with the gentle patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow child. Gardeners don't destroy weeds through superior firepower. They alter growing conditions until the ecosystem favors different plants. She gestured to the display, where new patterns were emerging in the data flows, subtle redirections that seemed minor individually but created cascading effects throughout the network. The Meridian campaign, for example. Your strategic analysis concluded that humans somehow developed impossible stealth technology to penetrate your sensor networks. but we never developed new technology at all. The display zoomed in on a particular sector, showing Kethri patrol routes with mathematical precision. We simply distributed autonomous signal generators that mimicked the electromagnetic signatures of migrating space whales. Your sensors detected them, classified them as natural phenomena, and filtered them out of tactical displays. Elena's smile held a particular satisfaction of someone who discovered an elegant solution to an apparently impossible problem. Your own defensive systems became blind spots we could navigate. Space whales. Vex then repeated with a hollow tone of someone whose professional competence was being systematically deconstructed. Magnificent creatures. Actually, they follow predictable migration patterns based on stellar magnetic fields, which made them perfect camouflage for coordinated fleet movements. Elena pulled up biological data on the creatures in question, complete with behavioral analysis charts. The key insight was recognizing that your sensor arrays were designed by engineers who thought like engineers, not like biologists. And this distinction matters because engineers build systems to detect what they expect to encounter. Biologists study what actually exists in environments. Elena's explanation had the casual authority of someone stating fundamental natural laws. Your sensors were optimized for artificial objects behaving according to tactical doctrine, not for distinguishing between actual wildlife and carefully orchestrated mimicry. Zithera's voice carried a note of something approaching panic. How many of our defensive measures have been compromised by biological thinking? Oh, most of them. Though compromise suggests active sabotage, when really it's more like evolutionary pressure. Elena returned to the larger strategic display, where the Kethri infrastructure now resembled an organism under stress, with certain pathways highlighted in warning colors. Every countermeasure you developed has been based on analyzing previous human actions, but human actions aren't consistent in the way military doctrine assumes they should be. Explain. Military thinking optimizes for repeatable success, identify effective tactics, codify them into doctrine, train personnel to execute them consistently. It's a beautiful system for conflicts between entities that think alike. Elena's tone held genuine appreciation for the elegance of traditional military philosophy. But humans treat each engagement as a unique creative problem. We don't repeat successful strategies because repetition creates patterns, and patterns create vulnerabilities. The display shifted again, showing a timeline of human Kethri engagements with tactical analysis overlays. Look at the progression. Meridian campaign used biological mimicry. Helix Nebula exploited stellar phenomena. Proxima Offensive treated your supply chains like ecological food webs. Titan Station Siege applied musical improvisation principles. Elena gestured to the timeline with the enthusiasm of someone showing off their favorite art collection. Each approach was developed specifically to exploit assumptions embedded in your responses to the previous approach. You're saying human military doctrine is adaptive evolution in real time? Krell Moss asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone trying to wrap their mind around concepts that kept changing shape. I'm saying human military doctrine is learning. Elena's correction held the simplicity of someone identifying the obvious, not just acquiring new information, but fundamentally restructuring how that information gets processed and applied. And you taught an entire species to think this way? Elena paused, her expression shifting to something approaching genuine modesty. I didn't teach humans to think. I taught them to think about thinking. Metacognition applied to competitive systems analysis. The tribunal sat in silence, absorbing the implications of a species that had weaponized self-awareness. The truly elegant part, Elena continued, warming to her subject with visible enthusiasm, is that the system becomes more effective the more people understand it. Traditional military secrets lose value when revealed, but metacognitive frameworks gain value through distributed application. Meaning every human who understands these principles becomes a strategic resource rather than just tactical personnel. Your military hierarchy concentrates decision-making authority at command levels, but human doctrine distributes strategic thinking throughout the entire organizational structure. Elena gestured to the display one final time, where the visualization had evolved to show something that looked less like a military organization and more like a thinking organism. You've been fighting an individual. she said with the quiet satisfaction of someone delivering a punchline that had been building for years. But I stopped being an individual the moment I started teaching others to see what I see. The silence that followed had weight and texture, like gravity made audible. How many others? Vex then asked finally. Elena's smile was answer enough. The tribunal recess lasted exactly 47 minutes, during which High Adjudicator Vex then discovered that pacing in circles did nothing solve problems that had no precedent in galactic law. When they reconvened, Elena had somehow acquired better coffee and was reading what appeared to be a scientific journal on her personal device. Fascinating article about crystalline formation in zero-gravity environments, she mentioned conversationally as the tribunal members settled back into their ceremonial positions. The mathematical models have applications for fleet coordination in asteroid fields, if anyone's interested. Vex then cleared his throat with the authority of someone determined to regain control of proceedings that had never been under control to begin with. Dr. Vasquez, this tribunal faces an unprecedented legal challenge. Oh, good. I do enjoy novel problems, Elena replied, looking up from her reading with genuine curiosity. We cannot prosecute you for war crimes because you hold no military position. We cannot charge you with terrorism because your actions were sanctioned by legitimate governmental authority. We cannot even classify you as an enemy combatant because you've never personally engaged in combat. Technically, I've never left Earth's solar system, Elena added helpfully. All my strategic contributions were delivered via long-range communication. I'm not even sure I qualify as participant in this war. Military prosecutor Zithera's tentacles had achieved what could only be described as aggressive nodding. Yet your influence has directly resulted in casualties that exceed most conventional conflicts in recorded galactic history. Influence is such an interesting word, Elena mused, closing her journal and giving the tribunal her full attention. It implies intentional manipulation, but what I actually did was publish research papers and teach university courses. The fact that some of my students happen to apply complexity theory to interstellar conflict resolution, well, that's rather like blaming a mathematics professor for bank robberies committed using advanced statistical analysis. The comparison is hardly equivalent. Defense Coordinator Krell Moss protested. Isn't it? Knowledge exists independently of its applications. I studied emergent intelligence in distributed systems. Other people chose to apply that knowledge to military strategy. Elena's tone carried the reasonable certainty of someone stating obvious facts. Should physicists be held responsible for every weapon built using physical principles? The tribunal exchanged looks that conveyed volumes about the inadequacy of existing legal frameworks. Dr. Vasquez, Vex then began with the careful precision of someone navigating a conceptual minefield. Are you suggesting you bear no responsibility for the outcomes of your research? I'm suggesting that responsibility is a more complex concept than your legal system appears to recognize. Elena leaned forward with the engagement of someone enjoying a stimulating philosophical discussion. I developed tools for understanding how intelligence emerges from collective behavior. The fact that those tools prove remarkably effective for analyzing and disrupting large-scale organizational structures, well, that says more about the universal nature of complex systems than about my personal intentions. But you must have known. Known what? That humans would eventually encounter other intelligent species? That those encounters might involve competitive interactions? That competitive interactions between complex systems tend to favor entities with superior adaptive capacity. Elena's questions built on each other with the inexorable logic of a mathematical proof. All of that was inevitable given sufficient time and contact. I simply prepared my species for statistical certainties. Zithera's voice carried undertones of desperation that would have been embarrassing if anyone had been keeping track of dignity. Then how do we end this conflict? If you're no longer actively directing human strategy, who do we negotiate with? That's the beautiful part, Elena said with the satisfaction of someone revealing the final piece of an elegant puzzle. You don't negotiate with anyone. You adapt. Adapt to what? To the reality that you're now coexisting with a species that treats problem-solving as a collaborative art form rather than a hierarchical process. Elena's explanation carried the patient enthusiasm of someone discussing their favorite subject. Humans will continue applying metacognitive approaches to whatever challenges they encounter. including the challenge of coexisting with species that think differently than they do. And if we refuse to adapt, Elena's shrug conveyed the casual inevitability of natural selection. Then you'll continue experiencing the outcomes that brought you here today. Evolution doesn't care about preferences. The silence that followed had the quality of mind struggling to process paradigm shifts in real time. So our choice is surrender or extinction? Krell Moss asked with a hollow tone of someone whose worldview had just been replaced by something incomprehensible. Your choice is learning or irrelevance, Elena corrected gently. Though I should mention that humans are remarkably collaborative once they determine that cooperation serves mutual interests. We're quite fond of win-win solutions, actually. Win-win solutions. Vex then repeated as if tasting exotic cuisine. Cooperative frameworks that benefit all participants. Humans have extensive experience with competitive cooperation. We call it economics, diplomacy, scientific collaboration, artistic movements, even recreational activities. Elena's tone suggested someone explaining basic concepts that should have been obvious. The key insight is recognizing that competition and cooperation aren't opposites. They're different aspects of the same complex adaptive process. She stood up and began gathering her belongings with the casual efficiency of someone whose work was finished. Where are you going? Zathera demanded. Home, presumably, unless you're planning to detain someone for the crime of being intellectually curious. Elena paused at the chamber entrance and turned back with genuine warmth. Though I should mention, if you're serious about adaptation, I know several excellent graduate programs in complexity science. Human universities are quite welcoming to interspecies students. The tribunal sat in stunned silence as the most dangerous mind in known space offered them academic recommendations. Dr. Vasquez. Vex then called out with the desperation of someone watching their last chance for understanding walk away. One final question. Certainly. Why? Why share knowledge that could be used to defeat your own species? Elena's smile held a particular warmth, reserved for questions that revealed fundamental misunderstandings. Because the knowledge works both ways. Any species intelligent enough to understand how humans think is intelligent enough to develop effective cooperation strategies. And any species capable of effective cooperation with humans becomes part of the extended human cognitive network. She paused, letting the implication settle. You came here to judge humanity's most dangerous weapon, she continued with gentle amusement. But our most dangerous weapon isn't military technology or strategic doctrine. It's our capacity to turn enemies into collaborators by teaching them to think the way we think. The door closed behind her with the soft finality of a problem solving itself. In the empty chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the intricate beauty of systems they'd never understood, the Kethri War Crimes Tribunal reached a unanimous verdict. They were no longer qualified to judge what they could barely comprehend. Outside, Elena Vasquez walked toward her transport, humming something that sounded suspiciously like jazz improvisation. Already composing her next research paper on the emergent properties of interspecies educational exchange. The war, such as it was, had ended the moment someone thought to ask the right questions.